I was talking to my dad the other day, and I think he filled you in on what I'm working on. And he's like, man, you should really talk to her brothers and Lori. And I'm like, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and have you talked to everybody else, or?
No, you're the first one as far as the siblings go. I have talked to Eddie. And, of course, my dad and some friends. I actually just got off the phone with one of her friends from Alaska for her Alaska time. So that was fun to listen to. But I'm hoping, because I do need to fill in some gaps with her childhood.
Okay.
So I was hoping to talk to you guys about really just any good or bad memories. Shirley has some funny stories. Anything that you just remember and you'd like to share.
And now, the story of phone calls, interviews, case files, and Josh and Amanda spilling it all. I'm Amanda Fallon, and this is the Shirley You Can't Be Serious behind the scenes.
All right, so episode 2, quite the change of pace, right?
We take it back to the beginning.
Yeah. And what were your biggest concerns going into 2?
Yeah, Shirley had written down her childhood, but as far as interviewing her, we didn't have a ton.
Yeah.
There was a part of me going into episode 2 where I knew we were slowing the story down and we were moving away from the true crime piece. And so that was a little nerve-wracking too. Because I'm like, are people going to like this?
Yeah. That part I really liked because it's quite a neat scene change, right?
And it was so much needed. Like we had to go back to the beginning with Shirley.
Yeah. No, I was worried about that. It's like, how are we going to get all this content, right? How are we going to make this if we're just using written stuff? And it was pretty nice to have Clay and Eddie fill in the gaps. After we had the call with Clay and he really brought their childhood to life, I thought that was, okay, now we've got something here. And I really liked that Clay contradicted Shirley's accounts, right? With her saying, oh, Mom didn't spank us, but she would guilt trip us. And Clay was like, no, Mom would pull down the covers and beat our butts. And he said it like that.
My mom would be the one that would deliver punishment. She, you screwed around, you were going to get 10 whacks of the belt no matter what. And she'd just wait till you were asleep, and she'd pull the covers down, and you were getting 10 swings. And that was the way it was.
So I really liked that. I really liked going into, I think episode 2 is the root of all of it. And even though we don't have a lot of information, we have enough to realize something happened here for Shirley to make the choices that she continues to make in her whole life. And then I thought it was really tender how Clay, as the little brother, recounts, and that's when she met Eddie. She was a homely girl.
But I mean, this is your little brother. Like, what little brothers would be like, my sister was hot, or my sister was attractive?
Yeah.
Because we found a couple of older photos of Shirley, and I was like, oh, she looked nice.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have called her homely, but maybe if I was her little brother.
Yeah. No, and she was a looker. Even Eddie.
My mom was an attractive woman, shapely, but had her stuff together. I think that may have been either subconsciously something that played into my mom because otherwise nothing else seemed to make sense.
No, I think what I do a lot is it gives insight into, she was brilliant at a young age. She became very resourceful. And I think there are some things where, the story with her making the teddy bear out of the little
fuzzballs. I think that was the most repetitive story she would tell. In fact, my daughter, Emily, when I would talk to her about these episodes, she asked me, are you putting Grandma's fuzzball story in? Mm-hmm. And I said, oh yeah, we have that covered. And I think I told you too, I was like, we have to tell the story of the fuzzball. Because that's the story Shirley told probably the most.
Interesting, right? And also Clay came in though, and he had a slightly different recollection of their financial situation.
Yeah,
right?
I thought that was really... So that's interesting because Shirley always downplayed stuff, except for she didn't downplay their finance. Like, she told me they had no money for toys. All she ever wanted was a teddy bear and a doll. And she ended up getting a doll, a hand-me-down doll from a neighbor that was really old. So you think she was born in 44, so this is probably the late 40s. And a neighbor gifted her with a doll made of glass because they used to be like glass porcelain dolls. And she remembers her little brother Clay one day picking it up and smacking it against the wall, and it broke into like 100 little pieces. And
We should call Clay and ask him about that.
we should call Clay and ask him about the doll. But yeah, Shirley often talked about, but again, she was the oldest child, and maybe their financial situation changed, later on in life. But for the majority of her childhood, through her teenage years, they did not have a lot of money.
Well, and maybe she was made more aware because she was a little bit older, and
She was the oldest, and she was a girl.
and she was working, so they probably said, "Hey, we got to pay this bill. Can you help us?" And Clay maybe just there was enough space between them where he was not as privy. You talked about your kids. Let's talk a little bit about day one when you started recording Shirley. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So, again, it would have been 2018. So I live in Salt Lake City, and my dad and Shirley live in Green Valley, Arizona. And so we decided for one of our get-togethers to meet at Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in Kanab, Utah. We met up there. We stayed a couple nights in their hotel, and it's really cool. Best Friends, you go and you volunteer, and you get to pick if you want to volunteer with horses or you want to volunteer with dogs or cats. And at night, you're allowed to bring an animal into your room. They have some animals that are certified. And so we had picked a dog. So in the background of a lot of the interviews, you can hear that dog.
Yeah, and we when we sat down with Brian to master these files, we removed a lot of the noise.
So we're at the hotel in Kanab at Best Friends. And my dad, he's so awesome with my kids. He's outside playing with them.
And I get a job with an aircraft engineering company, Collins Engineering, and I worked there for about a month. And then I got a job with Hughes Aircraft Company, which was a really good job. And he still wasn't working. And I ended up...
There's a big spider right there. No, it's a lizard.
And you want to put that on hold?
I mean, this was, Josh was probably 10 and Em was probably 7.
And I was pretty angry about that because, he was just kind of bumming around, not bothering to really find anything, And so I got a job at...
Where's the remote?
Okay.
And he's outside playing with them, and I'm sitting on the patio chairs with Shirley, and we're just watching. And I get my cell phone out, and I go, "Hey, Shirley, will you tell me about the time Ed faked his death?"
Yeah.
Like, something just came in me, and I was like, I want to start recording some of these stories to help her write her memoir later on down the road. And so I just pushed record on my phone, and she started telling me her life stories.
Now, my mom does not know when I left for Africa that I was pregnant with a second baby.
And that's why in some of these interviews, if you listen closely, you can hear the dogs panting.
And he has no gas. And I'm sitting at the border. So I'm sitting there for hours, and he's sitting in the gas station. So then luckily, there was he flagged down a car that was heading for the border and told him, what I was driving. He said, "If you see a woman at the border, tell her to come back. I need gas money, And so the guy saw me sitting there at the border, and then he comes back.
What was going through your head, though? Just sitting at the border
you know
for
what?
a few hours.
I thought, you know what? At that point, I should have either gone to Alaska by myself with the kid. I had the kids and the dog, or turned around and gone back home. Is what I should have done.
And then you hear there's a lot more noise that we left in, but it's neat too because that's when she told you about South Africa. That's when some of the music that we brought in too had to be a little a little heavier with deeper frequencies just because those recordings were so noisy. And I
didn't really know what I was doing back then.
Yeah, no, but I think it's cool and it's charming and it's pretty raw and genuine. And it's funny, a lot of the sound design that ended up going into these was more from necessity to cover up noise. We were just talking about this too. We didn't talk much about the sound design for Mount Lemon, but when I was scoring all of this and I was just putting together fragments of music, there's these interviews, right, with Shirley where some are long, some are little. The phone calls with Clay were sporadic, and I would lay down all of the initial vocals and dialogue in a raw track, and then I would sit down and just either I was sitting at the piano, say, hey, I have an interview here that's 2 minutes and 35 seconds. So I would play it in my headphones and then I would just sit on the piano and just riff. Or, hey, this is 7 minutes. How am I going to do this? And then on top of that, what is the emotion I'm trying to convey? Because there are some parts where the music is incongruent and that was intentional. Like in episode 1, Mount Lemon is so jarring. And on that one, I felt like the sound effects were more important, like when Sharon's in the hospital and we had to create the respirator and the noise. So I got just a recording of people at the train station walking around, and I brought those voices down. And then to make the respirator, I guess I could have gone to a hospital, but instead I just took a cell phone beep and I adjusted the pitch so it sounded like the little beep, what is that? The thing that's connected to your heart rate monitor. And then the bellows of the respirator were an old diesel engine. And I just took those, slowed it way down. So it's just.
Okay, so he took you up slightly from where? Was she uphill from you there?
I didn't see her.
Okay. Did he direct you to sit down?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's some real, I had to be really resourceful because I don't have a library of sound. I just had to create it. And
it kind of reminds me of like the old radio shows from like the 1930s and 40s where like to create the walking sound, people would put like shoes on their hands and like walk on a table nearby or.
Yeah. I looked, there's that moment where Patty picks up the phone from the receiver and then slams it. And I couldn't find any payphones, but I ended up going to an antique shop and they had a whole bunch of old Pac Bell phones. And so I just recorded slamming those and picking those up and hitting the buttons. But a lot of the stuff, just recording different sound effects here and there and then cleaning them up and bringing them in. The music, though, from episode 1 to episode 2 was very drastically different. And I wanted that. I think my inspiration is probably John Carpenter. He wrote the Halloween movies. And some of the scariest music that you'll ever hear. But also at the end of the second Halloween, it's Mr. Sandman. So this is really scary movie where this guy goes through a hospital and he kills all these people. And then at the end, you hear the Chordettes just singing. And it's so, and I remember, and I was too young when I watched this movie because my sisters are deranged, and when my parents would leave, my sisters would put on scary movies, and we had just seen this movie, and I was terrified. And then that music comes on, and it almost snaps you out of it. It's like
okay, back to real life. That was all just a dream. Like, that was all pretend.
Mr. Sandman. So then when we're doing the score for each episode, I wanted some of the music, and I think episode 2 was probably the most daring because it is Shirley talking about South Africa and the West Coast and things. So we go kind of into that 60s, right? That vibe.
Well, in different cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was, I guess for a minute you could think, this probably doesn't really fit, but I just wanted it to feel groovy and have kind of a, a funky feel. We did get some feedback that the music may have been distracting, but
that was one comment.
I think we can leave it.
It's on Spotify if you guys want to go read it.
I think we can live with it. No, but it was a huge challenge too, because to shift from different moods, right? Where Shirley's telling a lighthearted story, and then...
Well, was it a lighthearted story though?
I mean, I guess not. But yeah, how to change the mood from one episode to the other, and from one scene change to the other. And
well, and if you think about it, episode 2, I mean, it starts in 1944.
Yeah.
And then we end it with Ed's fake death in 1969.
Yeah.
It's almost 30 years of culture and music, and I think you did a great job.
Thanks, Boo. So yeah, that was looking for the different tone and texture and just feel. And then also trying to keep it all consistent with the same piano throughout. I think that also gave a subconscious like, oh, when we start hearing this somber piano playing again, this is this part of the story, or this is this device for this type of storytelling where she's being very, very sincere and we're getting information and insight. But yeah, I think not only did we want to convey emotion literally with what was being said, but the music, we wanted it to just kind of carry you through a vibe.
Yeah, and to go back to your point too of like lighthearted storytelling, I do think episode 2 is probably, I mean, there's still some heavy stuff in episode 2. We talk about like the crime family and having affairs and his prison, like losing his arm in prison and faking his death, like the heavy stories, right? But even with those stories, I think they're the most lighthearted, right? Out of all the episodes.
Yeah.
Don't you think? I think all the other episodes contain a lot more dark matter.
Sure. It has the most, it's almost Stephen King in the, like, what? It kind of feels like Stand By Me. It has a lot of these nostalgic moments. And even the way Clay's talking about it, the way he's like, oh, but he didn't want to work. And, he's recounting it in, you can hear it in Clay's voice that he's completely at ease talking about all of this stuff. And just very matter of fact, when he tells you, and I remember him telling you on the phone, like, oh, so he put his arm in a washing machine. And
I know. And then, by the end of, us listening to all these interviews and piecing them all together, it's like, it became normal almost for us to know, oh, well, why would Ed ever have a job?
Yeah.
Like, Ed never worked. Like, it almost became like, oh, yeah, so Shirley, of course, had to go get a job. Each time she talks about how they settled in a new area, she's like, so then I had to go find a job because Ed didn't have one.
Ed belonged to the streets.
Yeah. But it almost was becoming normalized for us.
Yeah.
Like, those were the roles they took on. So I can see why it was so normal, because that's just how it always was.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Clay, even to this day, was like, Eddie committed suicide.
Sure. And I do like our theory about, did Billy help Ed? Was Billy close with Ed?
I don't even know if that was a theory. That's just something I had always thought in the back of my mind. Because when you think about it, we'll need to go pull it up. Ed faked his death in August. So listening to Ed fake his death and then listening to the story of Billy coming out to visit Shirley, that was one of her happiest moments ever.
Sure.
Was when Billy came to visit Shirley. And they spent a couple weeks together. And I didn't know until I talked to Clay that Billy was actually AWOL during that time. I was like, oh. So in my mind, you know how we just kind of put pieces together and make things make sense? I always just and I never vocalized this, but I always just secretly thought, I was like, what if Billy came out to California to help Ed fake his death.
Yeah.
Because let's be real. Did Ed really have friends in California? Maybe he did, but
look, no, maybe, and Billy maybe didn't come out for it because California, that where they lived is the premier destination. If you're going to go on vacation, it's Santa Monica Beach. It's that.
Is that where Redondo Beach is at?
Yeah. It's part of the Santa Monica Bay. And so.
That was cool too, piecing the place, right? Because I knew Shirley and Ed lived in LA, but I didn't know exactly which beach he rented the boat.
Yeah. And so.
But back to that timeline before I forget. So there was a piece of that story that I was like, oh, maybe Billy helped, or maybe Billy knew, maybe Shirley told Billy, like, because timing wise, Billy was out there. And in fact, I bet it was Billy that took that picture of Shirley with Crane and Eddie on the beach at Redondo Beach, which was a month after Ed faked his death. And they all have smiles on their faces and they're sitting in the sand. Shirley knew Ed wasn't really dead, but the kids at this point thought their dad was dead. But the time period is so close together. Like Billy was out there within weeks or a month of Ed, faking his death. And then Billy left, and it was only a matter another month or two later, and then Billy was killed in the helicopter accident.
Well, it matches perfectly the accounts of Billy's personality, right? He seemed like kind of that free spirit, mischievous, didn't really care, got parking tickets, and was AWOL, right? Like it was that persona. And you think about Eddie idolizing him because he was kind of that very Americana. You think about the time and period where Joe Namath is on the cover of a magazine. Like it's this bad boy transitioning from kind of the James Dean bad boy, rebel without a cause, to now the military hero. And Eddie even says that.
Bill was, he was the athlete, the superstar, the handsome boy. Bill had it all. And, so he comes, he looks so handsome, and he's wearing his formal Marine outfit, going to the report in, and so he looked like a hero, acted like a hero.
Well, and to go back to that timeline, so it's 1969, so Eddie would have been 4. He was born in 65, so he was a 4-year-old kid, and he remembers Billy's visit to a T. But think about this just for a moment. Eddie was just told his dad was dead and drowned, right? And then Billy comes out to visit them. And probably part of that visit was probably cheering Eddie up a bit, right? Here's this confused little kid. His dad's gone now, but here's his Uncle Billy, this hero. And within months, Eddie is told another devastating death in the family. And maybe the thing that fascinates me too is Eddie doesn't seem to have a ton of memories with his dad the first go around, right? 4 and under. He's got a couple, but none of them are abuse memories. So I don't know if Ed was abusive to the kids then, or if that was something he started doing when they came back, or if he was and Eddie blocked it out.
Or he just didn't share them with us.
But timing wise, I remember doing the math and I was like, that's a lot for a little 4-year-old to go through. That's traumatic.
Yeah, and then that whole time in West LA, and then there's a lot of, if you let your mind or your imagination go a little bit, you can speculate on a lot of the things. I mean, even the whole thing with my dad's car.
Oh, that too, yeah.
But yeah, when we started looking at the different addresses and pinpointing where they lived in Culver City and where my family lived there in West LA. And
I thought that was really cool. I remember it was like a researching working night for us, and we were like mapping out stuff. And you were like, hey, I found the house that Shirley lived at with the kids with that long red front porch. And it was only a couple blocks away from my parents' house during the same time period, because they were there in, the late 60s, and your parents were there in the late 60s. Yeah. And I just remember thinking, that's so cool. Like, what are the odds of that? Like, look at how we're connected this way. And then it was a week later where we were listening to Shirley talk about, it was that one clip where we were sitting down and listening.
Oh, I didn't even tell you about all this. Okay, I forgot the part in California. He didn't work, but he stole stuff all the time. We had a stolen car in our garage. We had all kind of stolen equipment. I don't know where he got all this stuff, but our house was filled with stolen stuff. And yeah, he had this car, and he stripped down the car, and then he towed it and dumped it someplace.
Yeah.
And you and I, the bells, the lights, we were like, oh my God, that was your dad's car. It had to have been your dad's car.
Yeah, because it was late 68, early 69 where his car got stolen. And it was in that neighborhood. And it was, I mean, this thing was, and I tried to find it and I couldn't. But when she's like, oh yeah, and there was a car, and then he stripped it. And yeah, it had to have been, it's crazy because you think about that car was so rare, right? And
well, what kind of car was it?
It was a 68 Pontiac Firebird. It was the 400, and it was a super rare car. And you didn't see those. If you were in a neighborhood, you were going to steal a car, it would be that one. And so,
especially in 1968, 69
yeah.
LA.
Yeah. And so my dad was very, very low key, he was here on a student visa. He was, at that point, was potentially expired. And so he wasn't going to go make any waves or go talk to the police, but his car got stolen and he never saw it again. And that's, it's just funny how a lot of these stories intersect that way, but.
It had to have been Ed. Like, he's a master car thief. They always had stolen cars. There's no way he would have been driving around that neighborhood and saw that sexy car and not have been like, that one's next.
So, yeah, just kind of wild. That whole, this was the hippie era in Santa Monica, which Santa Monica and Venice Beach are kind of still stuck in that era. Like, that's where you go get pot. That's where you go. It's this very peace, love area. And my dad was, he had long hair. He was kind of a hippie.
Well, was he like borderline?
Yeah. I mean, well, he still had to be pragmatic, right? He came to survive and make life for himself and make money. And then he met my mom, and then he had to be a husband and a dad. Yeah, that was a really interesting realization as we were looking through this stuff that, holy crap, this dude just might have been the one that stole this car.
I think that's been one of my it's definitely on my top 10 favorite things that's come out of this podcast, is those moments where you have the aha moments, or the breakthroughs, or it's almost like a drug. Like, it gives you this rush when you like discover something or you're putting the pieces together.
I think too, though, like one thing that's kind of serendipitous that I really love is I didn't know anything about that car until a few years ago. I found this photo. My parents, I don't even know where the photo came from, and it's my dad kneeling in front of this car.
Do you still have the photo?
I do.
You should post it.
And I will. And we heard the story about this car, and my dad had kind of just put it in the back of his mind and never thought about it. And I was talking to my mom, and I was like, this is incredible. And she's like, oh, yeah, that was your dad's car, and it got stolen. And then they had to go back to Guatemala in the 70s to fix their citizenship. And then they were stuck there, and then they came back, and they were again in full just work mode. And it's kind of sad, like we were just talking about this with my siblings, how hip your parents are when they're young, and then to keep your family going, then they get the dorky van, and then they don't dress as hip anymore and all these things. But
to be fair, would car seats have fit in that back seat?
Well, car seats weren't a thing. We were talking about that too. Like, we used to ride, my mom had a Ford Ranchero, a really cool car. And my cousins were just here over the weekend, and when they came from Guatemala, we all piled into the bed of that truck and would go to the river, and we'd go camping, and we'd all be sitting in the back, and my parents would be going 75 on the freeway, no seatbelts, no nothing. We'd be eating fruit from our trees and just throwing the pits out the back of the car. But I think that the other thing that's really interesting is my dad turned 75 a couple years ago, and I had made a goal to find the car. Well, I couldn't find the car, and I ended up finding the same model car and painted it the same color from Pontiac and just fully restored it, and I gave it to him for his 75th birthday. And isn't that interesting how even the timing of that. And I'll post the link to that video. But just, again, this theme of, hey, let's see if we can restore one thing back to the way it was. Let's see if there could be this redemption. And he had never expected that. All the things he sacrificed for us, he didn't want any of that in return. And so when it came time to give it to him, worked on it for about a year and a half. When it came time to give him the car, I lied to him and told him we were going to a company picnic and a car show. And I entered the car in the car show under his name. And so he walked up and he's all excited because he's like, oh, that's my car. Wow, I had one of those, and he's walking around it and sticks his head in it. I was like, don't touch the car, Julio. And he's like, oh, it even smells like my car. Oh, that's so cool. And then Jay, one of my friends who's with us, and he's like, hey, let's go talk to the owner, see if he'll let you sit in it. And he points at the dash, at the little thing, and he's like, who's the owner? And then it said my dad's name. And that's when he realized, and I had the keys in my pocket, and I handed him the keys, and he starts just sobbing like a little kid. But yeah, it was kind of funny to think, here we've seen Shirley be in all of these moments in history, and then to see Shirley potentially be in a moment in my history.
Yeah, that was surreal. I remember that night with you. We were just like, oh my God. Like, cause you had showed me that YouTube video that you made for your dad, which is so cool. And yeah, you're definitely gonna have to post it on the Instagram or deadseriousmedia.com. And then to be with you like a few months later and us putting those pieces together. And I think I was like, wait, what year were your parents there again? And you were like, I forget what you said, like 67 on. And I was like, wait, Ed faked his death in 69. And at the time that he faked his death, there was a stolen car in the garage that Shirley was scared the police would see.
Yeah.
What are the, like that? I bet that was your dad's car in the garage.
And look, and sure, maybe there were more car thieves in that area, but I don't know.
Car thieves like Ed.
Yeah. What are the
living,
chances?
a couple streets away from your parents.
Yeah.
Even that alone. Let's just say Ed wasn't the car thief, stole your dad's car. The fact that your parents
lived close by, yeah,
were basically neighbors with Shirley and Ed.
Yeah.
Those odds are unreal. That's so crazy. What a small world.
It's nuts. Well, and look, and I lived in Redondo Beach. I lived in Culver City, right, before moving here. Just such a fun coincidence. But, well, let's talk a little bit about, do you think we covered Shirley's childhood enough? And what are the things you wish we had?
Like sitting here with us right now
would
be Shirley.
Yeah.
I feel like I have more questions than answers.
Yeah.
And that's with spending the last 6 years of my life researching.
Yeah.
All this project said is leave me with more questions.
Yeah.
But my gosh, if I knew what this project was going to look like, if I could have seen into the future, known how the story was going to be mapped out, the questions I would have asked her. Like if I could just go back in time and ask her, certain questions. Yeah. We would definitely have to ask her what kind of car was in the garage that was stolen.
Hey, was it this car?
We would have had to But that's what's kind of, you have to come to terms with some of this stuff. We'll never know if Billy was involved. We'll never actually know if that was your dad's car in the garage. Like we can only speculate. And at some point you just have to close the door and come to terms with some of the endings.
Yeah, that was really deep. I was going to add something, but I don't think I need to.
But it is still fun to speculate and come up with your own theories.
No, the one that, I was in the other podcast and we were talking about this with Ken and Aaron, and Ken started having a lot of the same thoughts, which I imagine a lot of listeners are having, where you start to wonder not just about her mental state, but at her level of awareness. And the word complicit isn't correct, because I don't want to suggest that she was taking part in things that were dark but yeah, it's a very interesting thing to start to think, okay, was she really as naive as she sounds in some of these journals, or are these journals very telling and have hidden clues?
I think she reinvented herself all the time.
Yeah. And what's even wilder is...
Freaks me out.
Yeah. What makes it to me a little more odd is it was when, and I don't know why the whole religious part of it to me makes it have a little more of a twisted turn. When she says, hey, I went into a Pentecostal church and they cured me of my arthritis. And then from then on, it was just like, and I think, you know, and then they went to dinner with Billy Graham. Like all of this stuff was just insane to me.
Do you think she was involved and knew about the killings in Alaska?
Look, this is the other thing I told Amanda.
Because it doesn't add up.
No, because on one side, I think her journals might be ciphers. Like on one side, she seems like happy-go-lucky and super naive. And on the other side, it's like she's super bright. That's why we really emphasize like, hey, she's really perceptive. Like her dry humor and sarcasm. Like this is what I think. I do think there was something in her inner child that made her have this strange trauma bond to these certain types of men. And so after being in that really abusive relationship with her first husband, when Skaggs came around and he checked all the right boxes, I feel like she might have sensed, hey, there's a lot of things, you know, he's coming home at 3 a.m, changed his clothes, and he didn't bring a moose back. There's a lot of things that she's kind of subconsciously turning a blind eye to so it doesn't disrupt her finally somewhat stable life.
Or is the journal a cover?
Yeah. It's like this alternate reality that she's creating.
That's what I was thinking. Like I'm like, is she naive? Because she seems naive, but then some of the stories, I'm like, she did that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So.
And we'll never have the answer to that.
Yeah.
But thinking of, I sat back, and when you think about Shirley's life, and maybe this wasn't fair to start with Mount Lemmon, I don't know. But to me, when you think about Shirley's life, what was the craziest thing that happened? What was probably her craziest day that she ever lived?
Well, yeah.
But then we started researching more on Ed.
I don't know. I don't think we know her craziest day.
Yeah, it might have been the day that Ed faked his death. That's another story I grew up with. Like, okay, and this is something that's so fascinating. So normally stories are passed down through generations. Or like if your uncle tells you a story or your grandpa, it's probably, let's just say 90% exaggerated. It's like the stories, I had to go to school and I had to walk uphill both ways. You know, just those exaggerations.
I caught a giant fish and it was 900 pounds.
Yeah. And with Shirley, I kind of expected that. Like I heard these stories and I was like, okay, let's find out what really happened. Like I need to research and let me validate some of this stuff. Mainly like, let me validate, let's make sure this actually happened and how did it happen? And what was crazy was as we started finding all the newspaper clippings that validated her stories, they were almost the exaggeration, like the actual true story. It's like Shirley would nonchalantly, like when she told me the story about Ed faking his death, she's like, yeah, I never knew he went out with a friend until that day I sat down and recorded her. I thought he did it on his own. But she goes, yeah, he went out with a friend and he flipped his boat, you know, and the cops came and said that, you know, he probably drowned. And then we find the newspaper clipping and it's like, first of all, it's like, okay, he really did fake his death. But not only did he flip the boat,
they said
the boat was lit on fire. I'm like, Shirley, how'd you leave that part out of the story?
The Coast Guard has called off the search for a Culver City man who went missing Wednesday. This after authorities found his rented boat burned off the coast at Redondo Beach.
It's Shirley's stories. Like the more we uncovered and the more we researched, a lot of stuff was like left out. I don't know if she was trying to tone them down because she knew how crazy they were, or if she just didn't remember. She probably just didn't remember certain, like, because it's very traumatic, right? These are all traumatic days in her life.
I mean, it could be her kind of altering her reality to fit her comfort level. I think it's deeper than that, though. I think it's her mode of minimal communication that also plays into her dry humor. And that's why I think it's genius. And that's why the creative decision was made to have the show that way. And Shirley's story was perfect for that.
And just, she lived through a lot. She was part of a lot of major happenings in history.
Yeah.
Like even going to South Africa.
The apartheid,
being there during the apartheid and her stories from South Africa, then her brother being killed in the Vietnam War. And heading up to Alaska during the height of the pipeline. Like, these are huge moments in history.
Yeah, and then how interesting it is that they were able to do that up the Alcan Highway. And her muscle car, the Ford Fairlane, and in the peak of like crime family culture in the middle of Ohio.
Oh yeah, growing up, she's born in 44, so growing up in the 50s, like where your little town, Bridgeport, Ohio, was ran by a mob boss.
Yeah.
In her subtle way of being like, even the kids knew, everyone knew.
Everyone in town knew what was going on with the mafia rivals, including the kids. The police were clueless.
Except the police.
And then she got to experience California surf culture. She got to experience like a lot of neat things. How did you envision episode 2 to go initially?
I think I was most worried about episode 2. No, I think I was nervous with episode 2 because we started with such this huge like true crime piece and chaos, and we have everybody's a journal, and to go back, I just from a creative standpoint, I think I was just fearful of like, are people going to want to hear Shirley's stories, or are they only going to want to be interested in the Mount Lemmon and Archer case? Like, how do we tell Shirley's childhood stories?
Yeah, I think that's what
it was.
Well, I was excited for the challenge that presented, because we just started with the fireworks in episode 1. Mm-hmm. How do we follow that, and how do we top that?
So maybe that's normal to like be nervous for episode 2.
I think we had the advantage of the stark contrast of scary, attacker, talk to him on the phone. What's your name? You answer.
Well, in episode 2 starts more of our creative stuff. Like, so episode 1 is very creative, and it's very, I call it like our movie. It's very action packed.
Yeah.
It's very, and then episode 2 is more like, okay, let's bring in the dark comedy almost, like the dark humor. Let's start bringing in Shirley's personality, and let's kind of test this out and see.
Yeah. The other thing I like is one of the things we had working in our favor was this dramatic irony that, right? Like when you went to watch Titanic, you're like, okay, I know the boat sinks, but let's see how this story unfolds.
Yeah.
We started off with this crazy event, and now we're going to see what led us here. Right?
But the ending of episode 2 is huge. Do you know anybody else who has told their kids that their dad died? Like, like that's huge. That's not just your typical like childhood story.
No, and sure, and that's right. That was how we overcame that creative problem, where we go from I'm going to meet this dude that attacked these women to ever since I was a little girl, I wanted to have 8 children.
Yeah. And I won Miss Homemaker of the Year award.
Yeah. And my mom was a caring mom. But I do love...
But then we slowly introduced that concept with Clay.
Yeah.
Like, Shirley didn't mention anything bad about her mom. Like, she just... mom was stern.
You start to see...
Clay's the one that talks about the beating, the spankings that they would receive.
Sure.
Clay's the one that brings that.
And they grew up in the same home. I think that's what I really like, is this subtle idea that Shirley and Clay were in the same environment, but living in completely different realities.
And they were only 3 years apart.
Yeah.
So it's not even like Shirley, got a different decade of their parents.
And I think that is really... Those kinds of details... When we sat down to do these episodes, and I started organizing all the content, where probably 20% of each of these episodes is what becomes the episode, right? We're looking at 12 hours of content that turn into 45 minutes of Mount Lemmon. And then we're looking at, again, 14 hours of interviews and Shirley content that turn into episode 2. I had to be really, really vigilant as to which tiny details are the ones that say the most with less. And again, that's following suit to the way Shirley wrote her journals.
Well, and me saying this story has to be in there. You have to make sure this one's in there.
Yeah,
you have to make sure this one's in there.
This round peg in this square hole that doesn't fit. So that that was always the challenge. All of these episodes. Episode 4 presented the biggest challenge. Episode 4 and 5 probably, where you have all these different stories with different tones and moods, and you make them work together, right? And how is it still maintaining reverence while having campy jokes? You know, it's like sitting down with Skaggs. How do we still talk about these very serious topics when he's cracking jokes about other things that, you know, or Eddie's laugh in the middle of him talking about these horrific things, and then that laugh that just shakes you. I think of all the people that have approached me about this show, Eddie's laugh, everybody says something about Eddie's laugh. How it's nervous, how it's unsettling, how it's filled with pain, you know, and how it's almost like a device that he's using to get through the memory to share it with you. So that was really episode 2, being really careful too, how we represent certain people. How do we respectfully talk about a crime family? And again,
I remember. I was like, we have to mention this, and I remember you were a little scared. You're like, I don't think we should talk about Charlie Maroon.
I was like, I don't
or
know.
bring that. I'm like, no, that was Shirley's childhood. It was filled with stories, you know, of mob bosses, and
yeah, I just didn't want to get whacked.
we're not going to get whacked. But that was one. That was where I was like, this. We have to put this in. Like, that was a huge part of her childhood. Most of her childhood stories to me were centered around Lorraine or those guys or the business. Like, we had to put that in there because it was a huge part of Shirley. And I think in a way it had to have shaped her.
Yeah. And that's again, going back to the Norman Rockwell element of this. It's a very Americana. Their dad worked at the steel mill. They went through the unions. You know, Clay says.
My dad worked in the steel mills. And, of course, every time they got 1 foot ahead, they go and strike and they get 2 feet behind.
So that's very ingrained in like this industrial revolution, and watching America go through all of those different phases where, we're coming out of war times, transitioning back into the homemaker mom.
Which that's what Shirley grew up in, and her dad was the hard work. Like, she was the typical American family, right? And then, but they had no money.
Yeah.
And then her best friend, her dad was a mobster, and all Shirley ever wanted was to have 5 dresses so she could wear a different one each day of the school week. And Lorraine would go home at lunch and change. Like, that's a huge. And she tells us I was jealous of Lorraine.
Yeah. And it was weird because she was jealous of Lorraine, and yet she got one over on her because Shirley became the homecoming queen.
That's true.
It's so there's this story of resilience and also families that just got by and they did it. Eddie later told us, he's like, dude, they might have been poor when they were little, but then they did really well. Shirley's parents.
After Shirley left the house. So it was Shirley. She's the oldest. And then it was her 3 brothers, Clay, Billy, Bruce. And then Lori, her little sister, came way later. And all Shirley ever wanted, like every time her mom got pregnant, she prayed for a little sister. But Shirley was already like a senior in high school when Lori was born. They're 17, 18 years apart. So Lori, her childhood is drastically different than Shirley's. Like, she was raised in a poor household, right? They didn't have much money. She had the 3 little brothers. Lori came along, and that's what Eddie refers to. And he's like, 'cause they would go back home to visit. And at that point, their father had stopped drinking. So Shirley's dad was sober and had put in like an ice rink in the backyard, like started doing stuff. And so Shirley got a very different upbringing than Lori did.
No, Eddie told us the story, right? They put a swimming pool in, and the news came in because they got the first swimming pool in the neighborhood.
And then he would turn it into an ice rink in the wintertime.
But again, those are all very American stories, right? Again, you think about, they're kind of relatable, but they're not. A steel mill guy could have a house with a pool, with a muscle car, and his wife could stay home and make meatloaf, all on one blue collar wage. So that's really neat, you know. And then looking at how she enters the workforce, right? She wins that secretary thing.
Oh, yeah. So a little bit of background on that is the electric company did a contest at the high school with the senior girls looking for their next secretary. And so they would come to the high school and do interviews and do tests. And Shirley won. Like, she was the fastest at shorthand. Like, she won that position as a senior in high school. And so you have to think about it. And at that time, that was really prestigious.
Yeah. Well, it didn't stop being prestigious, right? She went to Hughes, which later Raytheon. Like, those are big, those are high profile still.
Yeah.
Defense contractors, right? So I think those types of details give this insight as to, look, there's an ambiguity to this story where it's like, was Shirley super naive and clueless? Or was she in on it more than all of us? And I liked to keep that open and just give all the data and all of the facts for people to draw their own conclusions, even down to the end. Episode 7, I've got a lot of people approaching me where they're like, all right, I got so many questions about this meeting with Skaggs and the questions we asked and didn't ask. And one of the great things that I really liked is how that episode solves these mysteries to, oh, how could Shirley be married to this dude?
I think that's what episode 7
yeah, that's what
conquers.
It achieved.
Like,
yeah.
that's what it achieved was, because I even had my friends were texting me and they're like, oh, I fell for his charm.
Yeah.
You get it. You get it.
Yeah, we're going into the, and I had some doubts. I was like, did we make the right decisions here? And as we were mastering these final files, it's like, oh no, it's very evident how there's people that are just completely just integrated into society, and we're all in different frames of mind, and you never know what's going on next door, right? I look at my 5 neighbors and I'm like, I have no idea. And then that's why you see on the news when something happens and they interview the neighbors and the neighbors are like, he was cool, he used to let me borrow his lawnmower,
or they're like, we thought something shady was going on.
Well, it's never the ones you think. Like, I have one right now. I'm looking out the window. I know exactly, I'm like, but it'll never be those dudes. It's always the quiet ones that keep to themselves, and they volunteer at the library. And so episode 2 really is carried by Clay. I do love some of his stories because he gives insight into the things that Shirley didn't. And the other thing that was really fun about putting these stories together is the very stark contrasts. The things that people choose to carry with them through life and the things that people choose to discard. Shirley, who's very wholesome and very forgiving and very tolerant, holding on to some real trauma about, the little fuzz balls that her mom threw away, and talking about being poor and all these things. But Clay saying, oh, well, my dad worked at the steel mill and we had a paper route to supplement the income. He's like, but it was a good family. We had good Christmases and we had all the good things and all that. And so it's this weird way of how we all process and retain our lives. And I see that with my own siblings, right? Having Clay talk about stealing her car, and then the way that he kind of describes her as kind of a basic kind of, but then having the gaps filled in by your dad was like, Shirley used to tell him that she would race the boys in the fair lane.
Yeah,
right?
Which I don't think Clay knew that.
No. And then both of them saying, oh, well, our dad would just kind of stayed out of his way. Which...
That was the one thing that was... They validated by each other. Yeah. Was the dad was an alcoholic and... just was kind of grumpy when they were growing up.
At first, I was a little nervous that we didn't have any information on him. And the more I thought about it, I realized that the silence or the lack of insight into him speaks louder. Just the same way that having Eddie say, my sister's experience was worse than mine. That statement is it carries so much weight because we just heard for 40 minutes how awful his experience is. So you don't even need to know what happened to her to kind of gather. Because in your mind, you instantly answer the question like, there's no way anyone's experience could be worse than yours. So the way that Shirley and Clay say, he did this and we stayed out of his way. Like that says enough
You kind of paint the picture. Yeah.
And so, and then like you see little tiny glimpses and details. Like Billy was a rebellious soldier boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see Shirley and her choice of men, and then you see, so a lot of those gaps are filled in by, you're like, oh yeah, these things check out. When he tells the stories of Ed, that's when we meet Ed. And that's the only real time where you hear Shirley be like this giddy. She goes back. And this isn't
to her 20-year-old self. Yeah.
You know,
she's like, he looked like Paul Newman.
Yeah.
He said all the right things.
He was so handsome.
So handsome.
And then
the pressure ought to be too much.
Yeah. So I gave in. It's like this. Yeah. It's that moment of twitterpation. And so it's like, that's where you can identify, oh, this is a type of person she's going to choose based on where she is right now, right? Ultra religious, Catholic upbringing, feeling
oh
like,
gosh, that was way too funny when I asked Clay.
Were both your parents pretty religious?
My mother was.
And he goes, my mother was. So anyhow,
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, please tell me more.
that was really strange because it seemed like this formulaic.
Maybe
right?
that's what he blocked out.
Yeah.
Like Clay did not want to go there. Clay did not want to talk about religion and his parents whatsoever.
Yeah.
And we didn't put this in, but there are many stories of Shirley talking about how mean the nuns were.
Yeah.
And poor Shirley was so tall and they didn't have a lot of money. So her dresses, she often outgrew them before they had enough money to buy, a bigger size. So they always kind of sat above her knees, and she would always get hit with rulers on her knees from the nuns for wearing a dress too short. But I just thought that was so sad. Like, that the nuns are hitting this little elementary school girl because her dress is too short because the family's poor and they can't keep up, with the uniforms. I don't know. I always found that it's kind of heartbreaking. But Shirley I don't think she shared any positive memories about the nuns.
I don't know very many people that do.
Yeah. I mean, I watched that show called The Midwife and I love all those nuns.
Yeah, well, that's...
But what's interesting though, and this is another one of those connections in this story, is Shirley went to a Catholic school raised by nuns basically, and Joan Marie Archer wanted to become a nun.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just all these what do you call those? Synchronicities.
Yeah. It's a serendipity. Like this whole story is serendipitous. Who was it that told us? Was it Roger that told us that Joan wanted to become a nun, and then when she met some of them, she was turned off because they were really mean? Who told us that?
No, that Joan's aunt was a nun, I believe, and she wanted to become a nun. She didn't because she liked Keith. They were going to get married.
Oh.
But Shirley said the nuns were strict at least they were really strict at St. John's Central High School in Bel Air, Ohio in the 1950s.
Yeah, that
she got smacked by rulers a lot.
Whew. Well, think about it. Think about what brings life joy the most, and then having to abstain from that your whole life and wear a robe. I wouldn't be very happy either. Anyhow, what else goes into 2? 2 is a very gradual sneak peek into the Eddie that we're going to really learn to.
With the biggest one, Eddie revealing the very first memory he has of his father is him ruining
movie night
by him being born. Like, that's a huge foreshadowing. That's a huge one.
And look, and perhaps that wasn't the reality to his parents, right? But it stuck with him because somehow...
Yeah, it might have just been a funny story they shared. Like, we were watching a movie and we had to leave halfway through because your mom's water broke. But actually, knowing Ed, we don't really know Ed, but we kind of know Ed.
And he probably said those things in a very vulnerable moment in Eddie's life that just became core, right?
Yeah.
So we go in, we talk to Eddie, and he says, now, whose story was that? I think that for me was an amazing moment, not only because I got to sit down and hear Eddie's stories and just kind of get his whole vibe, but because we got to go to the Family History Center that day. Remember, we were looking for anything. We were looking for Ed's, like the police report or anything about to help us corroborate
I had a
this
subscription
story.
to like archives.com, and I basically burnt every avenue I could look for a newspaper clipping on Ed and to validate this. I was like, there has to be. I was like, there's no way a man, like a boat gets flipped and he drowns and it didn't make the newspaper in 1969.
Well, we were looking for his fake death certificate in LA
We
County.
were looking for that
So
too.
I'd made an appointment with the LA County Library, their archives department, and we were getting ready to fly to LA to look for some of these documents. And so I was like, hey, let's go to the Family History Library. We go in there, we're there for a while, and then they pull out their secret weapon.
Okay, so this for those of you that don't know, the Family History Library is part of
It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We went to Temple Square.
We basically went to Temple Square, like where the mega kingdom.
Sure. Yeah,
what do you call that big church?
It's Ancestry.com. Basically, it's the church is the leading authority on genealogy. And so I told Amanda, I was like, hey, we're going to go. You're going to tell these old ladies that we're looking for a family member that faked his death. Yeah, for perfecting the saints and redeeming the dead.
You may have wondered about the Mormon practice called baptism for the dead, something that may be new to some of you. So what is baptism for the dead? Where is it done? And why is it important to Mormons? 2,000 years ago, Jesus went to the Jordan River, where he was baptized by John the Baptist. Jesus set the example for all of us. But here's the problem. What about those millions of people who died without baptism? Baptism for the dead can only take place in Mormon temples, which they consider sacred. Each one is witnessed and recorded. And that's why Mormons are so interested in finding their ancestors, so they can do a proxy baptism for them. So when you hear the term baptism for the dead, remember, it refers to Mormons using proxies to provide baptism for those who have died without that opportunity. Now you know.
It's the mission of the church. So
they're like, now who's this person again, and how are you related?
You're like, hey, this is my stepmom's husband.
And then I'm sitting there trying to explain to this sweet, sweet lady, Susan, right?
Well, the first lady
how he
went
faked
as far
his death. I was like, well, this wasn't his real death. He faked it.
And she said, "Oh boy, that's a first for me." No, but we had gone through 3 ladies already. Like this was like the final boss of.
So they must
old
have pulled out
ladies.
the big guns,
Yeah.
right? And Susan comes over.
Yeah, she came over and she's like, "I've got special logins." So she logs in, and we can see all of these.
I just really want those logins. What logins are those?
We won't get into that, but so that moment for me was a massive breakthrough. And when was that? June?
Had to have been June. It was like the same week you ended up finding Patty Well. We like had major breakthroughs that week with the church's genealogy.
With the genealogy library. And you also found out that you're related to Marie Antoinette and Princess Diana that day.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. We're like 12th, 13th cousins, something like that.
Nice. And we found out that you have pioneer heritage and I don't.
That's so weird. Anyways, back to our story.
Susan logs in.
And we're going through newspaper, and all of a sudden, like I probably looked through 20, 30, and it's there. And it's like in front of me, and it was this moment too, because I'm like, okay, if any of the stories are exaggerated, it's this one. Like, right, it's the fake death one. And Eddie even was like, well, whose story was that? You know? So it's there, and it's even crazier
because the Coast Guard was deployed,
and I'm like,
Coast Guard officials say Edward Carroll rented a 16-foot powerboat at the Redondo Beach Pier. Search crews found charred remains of that boat 6.5 miles out at sea. The Sea Shark, a Coast Guard cutter, discovered the wreckage at 10:30 a.m. The Coast Guard officially ended its search late this afternoon.
The Coast Guard was there? Like I knew it had to have made the paper somehow, but the Coast Guard and the boat was found burned, charred. Like Shirley never mentioned a fire. She just said, "Oh, he went out, flipped the boat, faked his death," and then like that's just what was mind-boggling to me. And it was there. It was so validating. It was like, wait, this is all real.
Like this dude is the real deal.
Yeah.
And it was cool too because it doesn't confirm nor deny a lot of things.
Oh, and I
But-
might have screamed with pure happiness and shock and might have scared Susan
Yeah,
and
but
everybody
no,
else in the very, very quiet library.
Well, I've got photos of you and Susan just going, yay!
I know. I
And
think
she
even
was so-
Susan was like cheering
she was
for
so
us.
cute. And so we found a few other things that day. We go through, we hear more Ed stuff, and then we start looking at this time of them in California. Now, a really amusing thing is that Clay had no idea. He thought that Shirley had no idea about anything about the fake death story.
Which tells us that she kept that to herself.
Yeah.
For years, Ed fakes his death and comes back into the picture when Eddie's in between 1st and 2nd grade. So what is 4 to 7 years, 6 years old? That's, I would say 2.5, 3 years.
Yeah. The other thing, too, that's very interesting is that Eddie talks about how he never knew a lot of the things that his dad did as a young kid, and he fell into all the same things.
Because my mom kind of freaked out because she had never told me anything about his young life, and I was kind of falling into all the same things. As I grew up through a teenager, I got busted for stealing a car, and that's what put my dad in prison as a teenager, where he lost his arm.
And I wonder if Shirley's outlook played into that, because she obviously, and she seemed like she was pretty straight-laced and kept all the rules, but she also turned a blind eye to a lot of criminal activity. She, to the point where she talks about Ed and romanticizes this archetype that Ed is, who's a notorious car thief, but she was obviously attracted to him. And then the way she talks about Eddie stealing cars. And then the way, very interestingly, in episode 1, this is when we get our first glimpse where she talks about these boys that get thrown in prison. And she's like,
Actually, there were a couple I really liked, a couple young boys that stole a car and made a mistake, and they were being raped and stuff in prison. I felt really bad for this. There was 2 boys in particular I really liked. In fact, I took to introduce her to one of them. I really liked him, and he did get out and he straightened up. He said he did it on a dare. He didn't even need the car. He said it was stupid.
They had only stolen a car. It was on a dare.
So much so that she even brought
Her own daughter.
Corain out to meet one of them.
Yeah. And so
she was okay with Corain marrying
a car thief. Yeah. So that's kind of foreshadowing for, all right, now we're starting to see, okay, maybe she's not complicit, but she's also not oblivious. I think she's seeing.
I wonder if in her world, and we've talked about this before, you and I, because she went through so much, like to us, stealing cars is huge, right? But to her, maybe a car thief was so far down the list of bad in her book of like morals and values and rules, because she had seen so much worse. Like her best friend having like lit dynamite on their front porch.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What are these things that are normalized
like Ed
in her
putting
life?
his arm in the wash, marrying somebody with one arm because he deliberately put his arm in a washing machine and got it torn off. Like these really like just gory.
I think it's even deeper than that, because she says, I didn't care about the prison thing. So when she was this 19-year-old girl and she's talking about how her parents didn't like Ed.
That's true. She's like,
she was like,
but I thought, oh, I can save this guy. I can help him. I can help him to change. My love could change this man. The prison thing, I didn't care about,
Yeah, he went to prison. I didn't care.
Makes you wonder what else she saw in her childhood.
Yeah. Well, you don't grow up next to a crime family. That's what I'm saying. You don't grow up in these environments where things are normalized. We talk about the neighbor that mysteriously killed his wife.
She did have, that happened too. And we didn't have the room to put it in episode 2, but there was another family that lived on her street that she was really good friends with the daughter. And she would often go over there for sleepovers. And there was a story where she remembers her dad coming to her rescue because the fighting was so bad that, obviously her parents could hear him beating up his wife. And Shirley was there with the friend, their little girl. And this same family, he ends up beating the wife to death. And Shirley talks about how he never went to prison for it. He got away with it. He got away with murder. He got away with killing his wife.
So think about how much normalized criminal behavior she experienced her whole life.
In Little Bridgeport, Ohio.
Yeah. So then when you meet a car thief, it's just like, he's a car thief, but he's cute.
Eddie does a weird rationalizing with it too when he talks about, well, yeah, we did steal the Blazer, but we didn't steal from a family
that really needed it.
We stole from a family that had multiple cars in their driveway. So they do have this like rationalizing with with these things that are bad, but like making them okay.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of this Robin Hood mentality, right? Yeah. That's really interesting to see that, and then hearing Eddie at the end say, "Guess my dad's back from the dead, and he's back with amnesia." And he talks about how there's stories that they just learn to start accepting because there's nothing, right? Like there's a lot of things that.
Well, he said he accepted, when he asked his mom, why don't I have a dad? And she says, he died in a boating accident. He just accepted it and never asked any further questions. And then it's almost like Shirley was the one, like he didn't believe that his dad literally did go out. He probably just thought his dad ran off, and that's the story his mom made up. I don't think Eddie realizes that like his dad actually did that until we said we found the newspaper clipping. No, your dad literally went out. It's interesting because it's almost like Shirley bore the weight of the two of them. Like, so all the bad stuff that happened, it was Shirley's fault almost. Maybe not. So maybe that's too harsh, but.
No, but we kind of set
we
set him free on that because he thought it was just another thing his mom made up, and we're like, no, this thing's real.
No, I have yet to come across a story Shirley has made up, and I tried.
In fact, there's probably plenty of stories that she just suppressed and downplayed that are bigger than we know. And I think I wouldn't be surprised in the least if there were moments in Shirley's life where she made a harrowing discovery and kept it to herself to not disrupt her life, which was already full of chaos. So then how does episode 2 end is just with Eddie saying, hey, I almost feel like it did more damage for their dad to come back and having to process the dishonesty of that whole story.
Well, we asked Eddie. We asked him, like, what do you think life would have been like if your mom never went back, if you guys had stayed in California and made a life for yourself there? Because Shirley had a great job. They had a house by the ocean, like by the beach. The kids those are some of Eddie's fondest memories. Of Shirley playing with them and reading to them. And it sounds like California. Do you ever think, or has this thought ever crossed your mind, what would have happened if she would have just stayed single in California? Because she had a good job. She probably would have worked her way up and never went back with your dad. And then you guys went way up to Alaska. Has that ever crossed your mind?
Crossed my mind. It's been like one of those fantasies you have growing up as a kid, and all the time travel movies and things like that come out. It's like, oh, if you could go back and change something, what would you change? And and even as I got older, you still entertain those kind of fanciful thoughts. And it's like, my mom said once, that she doesn't regret it because she got us. But yeah, I'd think often, especially, through my teen years and whatnot, I was always entertaining that, what if, you could go back or somehow change that and us never, have gotten back together with them. Because then we were living in California, and a couple of the guys, like this guy named Hans, that she dated for a while, seemed like a nice guy. But pretty much everything, that was back when I felt like my mom loved us and cared about us as a little kid. That's when she was making the felt books. That's when she was, doing my bicycle, making the Matchbox car set. She was more focused on us. And the dating was there, but nobody had gotten so serious that, they were like around all the time, or, no one ever moved in or anything like that. She was, on her own and making it on her own. And where it could have gone from there, who knows? Heck, if she had just bought a piece of property in California back then, well, it was a sad thing, that decision to go back to my dad, and I don't know why she did. I really, really don't.
That's interesting. I think that too. I wonder what their life would have been like if Shirley wouldn't have gone back with Ed. Yeah. But I don't think she could have said no to him. She never did.
No,
he had a power over her.
Deep trauma bond.
They did. Yeah. And he was going to have to be the one that left. And so part of me does think that there was a sense of, I'm pretty positive Shirley went along with the plan. This is my theory, and knowing Shirley, I think Shirley knew he was bad. And so when he came up with this plan, I think she saw that as her way out. Not necessarily Ed's way out of not going to prison, but she's like, great, he's going to take this insurance money and he's going to leave us. He's going to go live in another state. He'll go find another girl. And Shirley even started dating. Those years, Eddie talks about, she was dating other guys. I don't know if she thought she was going to go back with him. So I'm sure that was almost a relief for her. And maybe that's why she went along with the plan. It was her way of getting rid of Ed.
There is a very interesting thing, though, that she did stay. It makes you wonder behavior that she observed as a kid that she also thought was acceptable.
Well, it stems back to when she got pregnant and her mom said, well, you have to get married.
Yeah.
She didn't want to get married. I think of Shirley, I think she was a product of her time. How would that conversation have gone if it was 2025 and she was a 20-year-old that found herself pregnant?
Yeah. And, the way she used to just gloss over these affairs. Ed regularly had affairs.
I think that was... Well, and she did leave him once they got to California and she found out about the single lady across the street. She did, to be fair and to give Shirley some credit, it's probably the most courage she came up with during that marriage. She had him drive her back home to Ohio. She did leave that time.
But she couldn't resist him.
Was it so much him? Or was it so much the religion aspect of it? This is your husband. You're supposed to stay by his side. Divorce is not okay. It's not allowed. He's the father of your children.
I don't know if she was religious like that then. I think it was an attraction thing. I think it was...
The fact that he looked like Paul Newman.
It was an attachment thing. And because he had all of these traits that she was perceiving as butterflies... That was just her nervous system being like, That concludes our deep cut of episode 2. And keep the questions and comments and critiques coming. We've loved deconstructing this, and we will continue to do this.
Coming up next time.
My mom took us to meet my grandpa, my dad's dad. I won art scholarships to art camp, but I didn't get to go. That wolf dog that we had has a story. The reason he was the runt of the litter.
Nature of violent death. Gunshot to the abdomen.